Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are at pedalshift.net/251, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 251st edition of the Pedalshift Project. My name is Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, I wanted to share some thoughts on snack and meal planning. Now, I've definitely talked about this on past episodes. I might have even done a full episode on this, but I think that I've had a little bit of evolving thoughts or evolving strategies on things around food for a bike tour, particularly around the Oregon Coast ride that I'm in the midst of planning for right now. So I thought I would kind of share what I did before and how things have evolved over the course of the years. So this is going to be different for every single different type of ride. If you're doing some big backcountry ride, it's going to be very different than the snack and meal planning that I'm doing for this particular ride. So I'm going to set out sort of the parameters of things right now, because obviously if your ride is different, you're going to be looking at this in a very different way. For this ride, this is the Oregon Coast. And if you're not familiar with the Oregon Coast, there is, it's about a week long, give or take, depends on how fast you decide to go and how many side trips you want to take and if you want to take any 0 days. But for me, it's about a week. There's tons of towns that you go through during this week long stretch of the Oregon Coast. You start from the north, you go to the south. You never have a day that doesn't have a resupply option. Let me say that without a double negative. There are daily resupply options and sometimes multiple resupply options throughout your ride. But there are also many long stretches with nothing for 30, sometimes 40 miles plus, depending on what part of the coast that you're looking at. So given that information, let me tell you how I handled snack and meal planning the old way, when I was first tackling the Oregon Coast. I was generally the type of person, and maybe I still am, that I wanted to be prepared for every possible scenario, every possible bad thing that could possibly happen. I never wanted to not have food on me. And I don't think that that's insane. I think that's actually kind of smart in some ways, but how you go about doing it, given the circumstances that are available to you, well, this is why this is the old way. So what I would do, I would often buy a lot of snacks in advance, more than I would need for one day. I would just load up in Portland typically, with the mindset, I want to make sure that I have the snacks that I want in great quantity ahead of time. I would also make sure that I had several meals with me as well, generally dinners, things that I would cook. Often they would be like those Knorr sidekicks, noodles or boxes of macaroni and cheese. Sometimes I would be carrying multiple meals, 2, 3, sometimes 4 different separate meals with me as well. As a consequence, as I was getting on the bus from Portland to go to the Oregon Coast, I would have very little space and very full bags at the beginning of my tour. But here's what would happen. Despite having all of these meals on me, I would be carrying at least 1 or 2 of them with me for the entire length of the trip. Why? Because, like I mentioned before, there are resupply points all the way up and down the Oregon Coast. And often what I would find myself doing is I'd have a box of mac and cheese deeply buried in my pannier, or I could just grab lunch in town, grab a sandwich, or grab dinner in town, or maybe I wanted something fresh rather than a box of mac and cheese. That's always what ended up happening. So I would eat better or fresher grocery items or restaurant meals or fast food or whatever. So the consequence of all this is at the end of my tour, this was an every time thing. I would get home, or I would get back to wherever I was going, and I would start unpacking, and at the bottom of my bag, I would make fun of myself for the smashed boxes of mac and cheese that I would inevitably discover in my panniers as I unpacked. And it was an every time kind of a thing. And I think that what I also found is that I liked the end of the trips a lot better because I wasn't carrying as much stuff in my panniers. It was just a lot easier to get things in and out as I was rolling. And the consequence of that is it's because I had a lot of food in there, and a lot of food that I didn't necessarily need in those moments at the very, very beginning of the tour. And then I just slowly ate through the tour as it went along. So that was the old way. Here is my modified way. Again, this is for scenarios like my Oregon Coast trip or any trip that you may have where you've got opportunities to resupply along the lines. And the whole point of this is to say, you don't need to carry everything at the beginning of your trip. You have plenty of opportunities to get the things that you need later in the trip. And that just makes your life a lot easier. It also gives you the opportunity for more variety as well. One of the things that I found is that I would get really sick of the snacks that I bought because I would buy a box of them or 2 boxes of things or, large amounts thinking, oh, I'll eat through this as I go through. Well, great. You got a big thing of, chocolate covered cashews. I'm making this up. I never get them, but let's just say for an example. And by the end of the bag, I'm just like, oh, I don't even want to look at these things anymore. What I tend to find is that my needs, my desires for food will change in any given trip. And having more flexibility is a much better way. So rule number 1 is I don't pre-purchase anything anymore. When I go to Oregon, I'm not going to be waiting on a box that I shipped from Amazon to my brother's place. I didn't do it this time because I'm not pre-purchasing. I'm also not drastically is the wrong word. I'm not frantically trying to come up with a way to hit a Safeway in Portland before I go out. Because you know what? There's a Safeway in Tillamook. There's a grocery store in Tillamook that I can go to before I start my riding. There are grocery stores on the Oregon coast in all of these towns. There may be grocery stores in all the towns that you're going to be going through too. Even if they're just dumb little gas stations, or mini marts or something like that. You don't have to carry something food-wise at mile marker 0 for mile marker 250, because inevitably you're going to have the ability to buy a bag of peanuts down the road. So you don't have to pre-purchase. Buying what looks good in the first town rather than buying something I think I'll want in advance is something that I've learned over time. Again, this goes back to my example of, you buy, again, chocolate covered cashews. I never buy those, but let's just say I did. If I buy them in advance and then I'm sick of them by the end of it, that's just a waste. It's a waste of the fact that I don't want to eat them and I'm just sort of forcing them down. And I'm carrying something that I don't necessarily want. So buy stuff as you go along. Another rule that I think that I've developed over time here is being realistic about cooking. I do it. I will bring a stove with me. I've done whole episodes of the show on whether or not you even want to bring a stove. I tend to like to bring it, if only to be able to make coffee in the morning. But one thing that I know about myself, even though I like to cook, when I'm on a tour like the Oregon Coast tour, I have way more food options available for me where I can just pick up food. And while I like to cook and I like camp cooking, I don't do it as often as I think I'm going to. So being realistic about that from the jump is going to stop me from carrying multiple boxes of mac and cheese, quote, just in case, because I tend not to make them. In fact, if there's one thing that I learned the last time that I did mac and cheese camping is that I realized I really don't like mac and cheese when I camp anymore. I used to. It used to be a go-to, but I really don't like it anymore. Maybe I just burnt out on it. So yeah, being realistic about cooking and what you want to cook and what tastes good to you when you're out there. Another big thing, and this is the real key to this modified way, you gotta know where your resupply options are, and especially knowing where your resupply options are right before, or the last options before your campsites for the night. Now, For those of you who sort of go with the flow and you don't know where you're going to be camping on any given trip at the beginning, this is a little bit trickier, but I think that in some ways it's more important for you to know where resupply options are, because if you're going to be kind of going on the fly, it's good to know where your resupply options are to help facilitate that. You can carry a lot less over the miles if you're not carrying multiple meals with you when you don't have to. I like the fact that by knowing where there are different towns and where I tend to stop anyways, after doing the Oregon coast for years and years and years now, I can carry meals for a fraction of the time that I used to, shorter durations. And it just ends up meaning that I'm able to go to a place and get what I want and know that that's kind of what I want for that meal later. I'm going to talk about something in a moment I call it the frozen peas trick, but it's really the frozen bag of something trick, because that can be a really helpful thing to help keep things that should be kept cool for not an entire day necessarily, but for maybe a half or a quarter of a day. That allows you to maybe get something that needs to be kept cold and have that in your campsite for dinner. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's a huge part of my modified trick here. What do I tend to like? Everybody's going to be different, of course, with what you end up liking to eat on any given tour. Here's kind of the stuff that I normally am looking for if I don't know, I'm feeling like I want this or I want that. If I'm walking in, I'm a blank slate and I don't know what I'm going to want to eat, here are the things that I tend to look for in any given grocery store. Number one is coffee. It goes without saying that coffee is sort of what fuels me, especially on the first half of any given day. I have prepared coffee in a variety of different ways throughout my bicycle touring career, for lack of a better word. I think for this trip, I'm going to do something that I don't tend to do very often, and that is I'm going to go even more minimalist, and I'm going to do a pour over technique. I've got a very small pour over filter that you can get on Amazon for, I think it's a reusable one. I think it's maybe like $5 or $6. It's really, really nice, folds up to next to nothing, weighs next to nothing. And, as opposed to say an AeroPress, which I really love AeroPress and how it makes a really nice coffee. This is even simpler and easier. All I have to do is boil up some water, pour it over this into my cup, and I'm done. And it also would allow me to just basically buy pre-ground coffee. Not my favorite thing, but a lot easier. And then I don't have to bring my grinder with me. Is it going to be as good coffee as what I would get when I make it at home or on the road in nice coffee shops? Well, of course not. But I'm camping, for crying out loud, and everything tastes better when you camp, I've noticed. So that's what I'm going to be doing probably for this trip as well. Pop-tarts. If you're not in the United States, I am not sure if Pop-tarts are a thing outside of the US. I know you can get them because my cousin, I believe, is a big aficionado of them, and she is able to get them in Belgium. So you may have to go... If they are not more widely available, go to the American junk food section of your store. And I'm sorry, I think that this is an American thing that we have foisted upon you. These are garbage, but they are great calorie to weight ratio. I think that they are kind of gross and kind of awesome at the same time. I do like them for breakfast and I like them for snacks. They have an insane amount of calories in them. I believe that when you open up the little foil package, there's 2 of them. I think that those 2 pastries, and I use the word pastry really, really, really reluctantly, but they're 500 calories, and they're light, they're easy to carry. Yes, they break apart like crazy, but if you're hungry, it doesn't matter. You'll just scarf those down. Excellent to start your day calorically. It's all sugar. It's junk. It's great for snacks. I think it's a fantastic option. They're really inexpensive. I would never eat these things except on a bike tour, but I think they're fantastic for a bicycle tour. So Pop-tarts. I'm an aficionado of strawberry. I also like the cinnamon sugar, but I am open to just about anything, whatever is available in any grocery store. The other nice thing is that they tend to be available gas stations as well. So really, really available, ubiquitous, in fact, here in the US. Your mileage may vary outside of the US. Canada, I got to figure that we foisted these on you. Sorry. Nuts. I like all sorts of different types of nuts. It's a nice savory option. I do like cashews, even though I made fun of chocolate-covered cashews. I tend to just get the salted nuts. I tend not to get flavors or anything like that, or the honey roast or whatever. Although I allow myself to eat sugar on bike tour, for my nuts, I like them to be kind of just real basic. Peanuts, cashews, almonds, the macadamia, your macadamia nut. If you want something really fancy, I'll go with any of that. Really good, high calorie, good, excellent bang for the buck. Lightweight, stands up to anything. Don't have to worry about refrigeration or anything like that. Cheese. I know that folks will have different points of view on whether you need to refrigerate or store cheese cold. I have found a run-of-the-mill cheddar cheese I have kept for several days unrefrigerated in a handlebar bag or in a pannier on bike tour. I try to avoid it carrying cheese for hot weather rides. I will not usually bring something like that on a C&O ride unless I intend to eat it that same day. You can do the harder cheeses, the pecorinos and stuff like that. Those will stand up a little bit better to warmth. But I think that they're okay for an Oregon coast ride for a multiple day kind of a thing. I'm also traveling through a well-known cheese area of Tillamook, Oregon, and I tend to like to get a big brick of Tillamook cheddar. It's quite good and is an excellent thing for a snack, for supplementing a meal. I think it's a really good thing. Again, great bang for the buck calorie-wise and good protein, etc., etc. As far as drinks go, I have a few that I tend to like the most. I do like having sports drinks, whether it's a Gatorade or whatever brand you like, but I don't like drinking it straight. I tend to prefer to take one of my water bottles, drink out half of the water bottle, and then fill the rest of that with sports drink. And then I'll do that. I'll also kind of do the little bit of filling up the sports drink bottle with water and just kind of diluting it down as I can throughout the day. I find that when I drink the sports drinks straight up, it's too much. Sometimes I won't feel very good, but I do find that they are helpful. I also take electrolyte pills with me for a less hot day. Like I'm going to be having, I don't need to rely on those so much. I do like mixing up the water with the sports drinks from time to time. By the way, grape is the only possible flavor. I make fun of that all the time. I love grape. If grape is available, that's the one I get. I'm not brand conscious. I just get grape. If I don't have grape available, then I just sit there and hem and haw for a bit in front of the cooler because I just like the grape. I don't know why. Sugary caffeinated drinks. I like those for hills and for the second half of days. I have found that I will get really fatigued and feel almost like whole body pain if I don't keep up with my glycogen. And that is basically I gotta eat some sugar. I don't like eating sugar generally, but it's really good for me for bicycle touring. I've tried the whole go keto and all this other thing. And you know what? When all is said and done, for me, it's a lot harder to stick with it. And I find I just feel a lot better when I have a full sugar Coke, which God, that's just terrible for you. But I tell you what, in the middle of a day, if you've got a hill coming or it's hot or whatever, it just perks me up. It really does make a big difference, when I'm riding. I don't underestimate the need for simple carbs when cycling, if that helps you. If you're rocking keto and you stay away from simple carbs and sugar for your riding, more power to you. I tried it, just doesn't work for me. Big sandwiches. I don't like Subway all that much, but I love Subway on tour. They're ubiquitous. They're everywhere in the States. You can get a footlong, eat 6 inches of it, and then wrap up the other half to have while you ride by the side of the road. I find that to be awesome, especially on days where maybe there's a big stretch of open road where there's nothing for a while, and it comes around the midday time when I need to have a little bit something extra. Sometimes I've been known to get 2 footlongs in one shot, where one will be for eating through the day for lunch. The other will be for my dinner at the end of the day. I don't think I generally tend to do that for an Oregon coast ride, but I've done it for other rides. inexpensive, reasonably decent, but the best part is the way they wrap them, they stand up pretty well in a pannier. I'm a big fan of that. Doesn't have to be Subway, can be regular old local sandwich shops. I do try to focus in on local dining and local options as much as I can. I just find it's better, tastes better. You're supporting the community a little bit more that you're riding through. But I will confess, I do stop at Subways and McDonald's largely for their Wi-Fi when I'm there. Occasionally, these are a couple of things that I don't eat very often, but I do. I'm reminded of picking these things up because, in the moment they seem like something I really, really want. And when I'm craving something, I tend to get it when I'm riding. Chips or crisps, depending on what part of the world you're from, those can be good bang for the buck calorie wise. Also, Snickers bars. I just like the combination of your caramel, your peanuts, and your chocolate. In the nougat, I like all that. Those tend to be good for an energy bar replacement. One thing that I would say is, over the years, I've looked at a lot of these energy bars, and they are not really all that great for you. I don't think that they are more energy available for you than a Snickers bar. So, they're full of sugar and they're full of all sorts of stuff. I mean, different brands are better than others, of course, but I tend to find, a good Snickers bar is as good as an energy bar, for me at least. And my brand of cycling. So that's often when I go. Those are the things I tend to like, but I'll pick up random stuff. If there's like I've had caramel popcorn before. I've picked up local delicacies. I will pick up and eat as I roll. I've been known to get a fish and chips or something like that as my lunch. Just sort of depends on what you're feeling and what you're wanting. Heavier food, a fish and chips, you got to be ready for how that's going to feel as you ride. But sometimes a big calorie bomb like that can be really helpful. It just depends on how your body is behaving through all of this. I tend to go for heavier meals at the end of the day and lighter meals while I'm riding. But again, your mileage may vary. Beer. I get this question a lot. I talk about beer on the show relatively frequently. I think beer is culturally a part of a lot of people's bicycle touring. It's not for everyone. There are many of you who listen who are not interested in beer, not interested in drinking. So feel free to fast forward on this. I do like a beer at the end of my day. Sometimes a couple of beers. It depends on what my deal is, what my next day is like, how early it is, etc., etc. I do not care for generally grabbing a beer midday. I know that there are some folks that like that. You get a nice little calorie bump from it, and they're able to ride on a beer or two and bang out an additional 30, 40 miles after that. I am not one of those people. I have done it before. I suspect that I will probably do it again, where I will get a beer midway through a ride and just go with it. But I just know that my performance just drops, and it tends to make me a worse rider. Not because I'm drunk or anything. It's just that the effects of alcohol is a performance dropper for me as opposed to a performance booster. So I tend to get beer if I'm camping in the last town store before camp. And I'll keep it cold with what I was talking about before, the frozen peas trick. Some bag of frozen food. Generally speaking, I try to get a bag of frozen anything that I am going to be using in any meal that I'm making. Historically, I would get a bag of frozen peas and I would put them into my mac and cheese, and that would be how I would do it. The frozen peas will keep beers cold. It will keep any kind of frozen desserty thing cold if you choose to get ice cream or something along those lines. Over the years, I found that the frozen peas ended up being a bit of a waste, and I don't like to waste food if I can avoid it. So now I'm getting things like frozen fruits, or I'll get a little pint of ice cream, and knowing full well that it's going to be a bit melty by the end of the trip there, but that will help keep beers and other things cold. Of course, it's also going to depend on how far I have to go to camp. There are many towns on the Oregon coast route that I'm doing where they're literally just a couple of miles away from camp, so I do not have to worry about it all that much at all. So beer, keep it cold, keep it to the end of the day for me. Veggies, as I mentioned, I do like to integrate them into food. I love me a bagged mixed salad for dinner. You know, the ones where it's got everything in there. It's got your croutons, it's got your dressings, things along those lines. I like those a lot. They're easy to prepare. I can eat them out of the bag. I just kind of put all the ingredients in there. I give it a good shake, and then I can just use my my spork or whatever to eat it directly out of the bag. I have found that vegetables are really, really helpful to eat, especially in bulk like that while you're on the road, because what it does is it helps cut into a lot of the junk calories that I tend to eat while I'm riding. I've struggled with this for a while. I was like, oh, I'll try to eat clean and do this and do that. And, you know, ultimately, what's available to you, what feels good for you, how you want to feel your body, you know, these are all personal choices. And I found that one of the best ways that I can do to balance all this out is to just have a big vegetable bomb as part of my dinner meal. And those bag salads are really, really helpful for all of that. If I'm eating out, then I'll tend to do something different. I'll try to get vegetables another way. Eating out is a frequent thing for me. It tends to be something that I do for lunch. I mentioned the Subway situation before, stopping for sandwiches. That tends to be the type of thing that I do. Wraps, they're great. I will usually, in a trip like this, do dinner as something that is a grocery store run. Sometimes I'll get pre-prepared meals. Sometimes I will get something that I'll cook. It just all sort of depends. I'll go with the bag salad. Of course, that's always a huge thing for me. But I tend to like to eat in camp in the evenings with some exceptions. Newport, Oregon, I'm looking at you. You know, Brewers on the Bay is one of my favorite places to go. It's a real treat to stop at. It just sort of depends on my mood and what's available too. I do like to get into camp on the early side. I like to be able to choose the better of the camping sites. I tend to be a leave early, arrive early kind of person. So that all of those things sort of make my day what it is. And if camp is not really near a place where I can go out to dinner, or I get to camp often and I'm like, I really don't want to get back on my bike for even a mile or 5 miles for sure, you know, that will make a decision for me about what I do, which is why I tend to like to bring fresher food with me that I will bring back, consume completely, and not have to carry much further than those couple of miles that it tends to be. So that's sort of my philosophy now. You'll notice that it's much different, or maybe just it pivots different. It's focusing more on buying food as I need it and eating it as I have it, rather than getting a whole bunch of stuff and carrying it with me for miles and miles and miles. This works for a trip like this. It does not work for a ride like the Great Divide. You got to carry a lot of food with you. You're not going to be running into a Subway or a Brewers on the Bay or a grocery store in the midst of some of the longer 3 to 5 day stretches where there are no towns whatsoever on a ride like that. This is for a ride where you're on an ACA route, for instance, and you've got towns and you've got the ability to eat as you go. And that for me is a comfort. And I've also been able to let go of my need for quote emergency stuff. You really don't need to have a lot of food on you on a route like this. If I have a few bars and whatnot, I can certainly get through a night. If for some reason I end up getting stranded someplace randomly and can't get help, I mean, it's an unlikely scenario. And I've learned that unlikely scenarios, you don't need to necessarily be accounting for all of the time. It just sort of depends on the scenario. Just depends on your ride. So anyways, that is my brand new, I call it brand new, my modified way of handling snack and meal planning. And I hope that's helpful for you for your next bicycle tour. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedalshift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedalshift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Didis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Avilas Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Dan Gebhardt, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemas, Connie Moore, William Goffman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latois Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Tom Bilch, Ronald Piroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Letko, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCulloch, John Hickman, Jack Smith, Carl Presso, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Dave Fletcher, James Stratakis, David Neves, Mike Lazuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Wild, Matthew Sponseller, Chad Reno, Daniel Greger, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.